everybody. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified of each new video as they come out.
Hey everybody, I'm JJ Johnson. You're watching Reality Survival, and today we are going to talk about the first 10 things to do if there is a nuclear strike or nuclear missile inbound. And I'll just say that I've had a few people express concern about nuclear war and all that kind of thing recently, and I'm personally not worried about it. I don't tend to be an alarmist or anything like that, but the whole concept of nuclear or mutually assured destruction has done a pretty good job at keeping us safe for a long time, and I know for certain that there's no country in the world that keeps their arsenal as well maintained as the United States does. Other countries have a significantly worse track record in that regard, so there's a lot of question about how effective their missiles would even be. However, I thought it was a good thing to go through, just a good thought exercise to kind of work through, and so I've done some research. I put together some notes, and I also kind of went through like what would I do here at my house and that kind of stuff. So that's just kind of a combination of all the things that you're going to hear about here. So with that, let me kind of go ahead and get started on this. The warning time for an inbound nuclear strike really depends on a lot of variables. There's really not any way to determine how long we may have as far as advanced warning goes. It could be as little as 10 minutes, or maybe even a little less, to potentially up to a couple of days because of, let's say, if there was a gradual ramping up of tensions or something along those lines, and then the government decided to, issue an alert saying that this is probable and, those kinds of things. I saw that. The reason I say that is because I saw that happen in 2002 between India and Pakistan. And coincidentally, in the news right now, they're doing the same thing. But when I traveled as part of the Secretary of Defense's protective security detail at that time to go do the advance for his mission, and the government required the airlines to hand us out a little notice basically saying that you're flying into an area with heightened nuclear tensions and all this kind of stuff. So it's possible that the government could warn you a little earlier than just last minute. I don't really know if that would happen here in the United States or not, but for argument's sake, we're going to say that we're going to have somewhere in the range of 10 to 45 minutes notice. Okay, it's really hard to tell. So there are three things that are going to save your life when it comes to a nuclear blast and the subsequent radiation, and that is time, distance, and shielding. So I'll talk a little bit about each one of those points here first before we start getting into the steps. And I want to talk about these just in some generic ways so that you understand that it really all depends on how close you are to the situation, to the blast, to ground zero. If you are in a critical zone, there's not going to be anything that you can do. Essentially Bohica. But if you're outside of that zone where there's an immediate environmental impact, then it's a very survivable event. That's the first thing that you need to know. A lot of people think that a nuclear war is something that the life on Earth is going to end, and there's no way that we can survive it, and all that kind of stuff, and that is just flat out not true. Is there going to be some difficulties? Oh yeah. Is there going to be a lot of deaths? Oh yeah. Is there going to be a lot of cancer long term and all that kind of stuff? Oh yeah. There's going to be issues, but it's absolutely 100% survivable. And time, distance, and shielding is going to be the primary three things that will determine whether or not you survive. So with time, we're essentially talking about the amount of time that you are exposed to radiation. This is cumulative throughout your life. So you want to do as much as you can to limit exposure to radiation as possible. And again, we're talking about this in very generic terms. I'm not trying to be specific. I'm not trying to be, getting into the weeds and all these kind of things. So I know there's probably nuclear experts out there, Robert, and we're really not trying to get in that depth. What we're really trying to focus on is what you want to do. But knowing about time, distance, and shielding is going to help you formulate the plan for what you're going to do. So distance. How close are you to the source of radiation? That's going to determine the dosages of radiation that you receive. In a nuclear blast where the sphere of radiation is expanding from a center point outward, if you double the distance from the center, from ground zero, you will reduce your exposure by a factor of 4. Distance is the best way to reduce your chances of radiation exposure if you can safely travel. And that's a huge if. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Shielding is basically putting thick layers of solid objects between you and the blast, and that's going to help reduce radiation as well. Shielding is also a good way to reduce radiation. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission says a general rule of thumb that can be used is that it takes 2 inches of lead to reduce the dose by a factor of 10. Most people don't have lead in their houses, so that's not super helpful. Therefore, if a radiation detector measured a dose at a certain distance to be 100 millirems per hour, 2 inches of lead would reduce the dose rate to 10 millirems per hour. This value is called the 10th value thickness of lead. To accomplish the same reduction using other materials, it would require 4 inches of iron or steel, or 8 inches of concrete, or 24 inches of water. So the reason I mention this is because of the 8 inches of concrete. That is pretty similar to the thickness of most basement foundations nowadays. So getting to the basement and setting up an area in your basement is going to be important. Okay, let's see. So the exact values on all that kind of stuff really depends. There's a lot of information on the internet that can tell you, 3 inches of soil gives this much, so much, wood will give you this much reduction and all that kind of stuff. That's pretty technical, and I didn't want to get into all that here. The overall point of shielding is that it helps to put significantly as much solid material between you and the blast as possible. This is also why being in the basement provides more protection. Okay, so let's get to these 10 things. That was a kind of a big lead up, and I'm sorry. If you have a 3-minute attention span, this video is not going to be for you. You might want to go ahead and take the little wheel and put it on ×2 or something along those lines, but there is 20 points that I want to cover. And I will also put the links to this information as far as the research and stuff that I got in the description below as well, so that you can look into it more in depth if you want to. Okay, but again, like I said, some of this is research, some of this is pulled from my own experience, my own knowledge, my own training in the military, and just stuff that I would do just because it makes sense. Okay, let's see. So the following advice is for preppers who have your basic food, water, security, personal protective gear, etc. all squared away. All right, this list is not going to be necessarily for people who haven't really done anything to get your prep squared away. That list would be maybe a little different. So, all right, number 1 is get home before the strike, if possible. Again, if roadways could be congested depending on how this message comes out and all that kind of stuff. It could be a complete nightmare. You might find major roadways closed. You might find freeways closed. It's hard to say. If the strike is imminent, if you're not home, you want to try to get to the center of a concrete walled basement as soon as possible. So wherever you're at, if you have to, if you can't get home, if traffic's clogged up and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to make it, find a building, get in the basement, get in the center of the basement. As you're getting out of your vehicle, go ahead and grab your get home bag because you're probably going to need to stay in that building for a minimum of 24 hours. Okay, and it all depends on where the bombs hit and all that kind of stuff in relation to you, but you should expect it to be a minimum of 24 hours. If you frequent the same locations in your daily routine, it's a good idea to do some recon missions and to look around and say, hey, what building would I go to? Do a little bit of advanced planning, I guess is my point here. And that way you don't have to spend time when literally seconds are critical trying to figure out where to go. So that's part of the first one there. Okay, if you're in your car when the bomb goes off, if you can't get to a building, you want to roll the windows up. You want to duck down and stay in the car until the shock wave goes out and then back. If you're close enough to feel the return shock wave, you likely need to get out of the area as soon as possible. Okay, because it's likely that you're going to be experiencing higher doses of radiation at that distance. So you would want to, if your car still runs, try to get out of there. We'll talk a little bit more about cars running and stuff like that here in a minute. Okay, when you arrive home, so we're going to assume the majority of this is going to assume that you're able to get home, or that you're already at home when it happens. Okay, number 2 here is when you arrive home, pull the vehicle into the garage and close the door immediately. All right. The garage door thickness is not very thick, but any amount of shielding is better than none. Okay, so you want to go ahead and try to get inside as soon as possible. Bring your family pets inside if you have family pets, if that's a concern for you. If you don't care if they fry, then okay, whatever. But it's worth mentioning. You also may want to pre-pack up a kit that can help you deal with pet waste ahead of time, because once you close yourself in, you're going to have to be inside for quite a while, and you have to deal with the pet's waste also, not just your own. So something to think about. Okay, number 4 is, and this is all going to be, all of these things, I want to back up just a second, all of these things are based on the assumption that you have determined that you think you have enough time to do these. If you believe that the strike is imminent, then getting to the basement might be the only thing you have time to do. If you have taken a look around, I did a video on this, on nuclear fallout and all that kind of stuff, where I was showing you some examples of patterns and stuff like that. I think it was from nuclearsecrecy.com, and you guys should really check that out and look around your area and determine, are there any likely spots? And I'm sure if you put in, what are Russia's military targets in America into Google or something along those lines, you can probably come up with some pretty good ideas. But key infrastructure areas, big cities, military bases, those kinds of things are all going to be probably on that list, right? So if you've got some of those things that are close to your home, you're probably going to have less time, okay, and be more likely to be hit. So you should do more pre-planning if this is something you're concerned with. If you are farther away from those critical targets, you live in a more rural area, you're likely going to have a lot more time to take care of these things, and you could safely do these things without there being a big issue. Okay, so number 4, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because some people will listen to this and all they hear is all these things being listed off, and they're going to say, you'll never have enough time to do that. Well, it depends, and maybe you won't. But at least this will get you thinking about what you could do, what you couldn't do. Maybe you'll develop your own checklist. This will be printed off at realitysurvival.com. If you want to, print it as a PDF, include it in your emergency binder, you're more than welcome to do so. Whatever. It's really just a thought exercise. So number 4 is close the main gas valve as soon as you arrive home. I would suggest leaving a gas shutoff tool tied to the gas pipe. So you can buy these gas shutoff tools. I'll probably try to link one in the description below from Amazon. They're pretty darn cheap, and it's a fairly they're not going to get hurt by leaving them outside or anything like that, because it's a fairly simple tool. And if you ever need to shut the gas off in a hurry, the tool will be right there already tied to the gas main. Okay, so you want to shut that off. If the blast wave does any structural damage to the house, having the gas already turned off can prevent dangerous leaks that might later cause a fire. If the house got hit by the blast wave and it shifted the house, caused a break in a gas line, you may have been able to otherwise survive it, but with the gas leak, you're creating an additional big hazard. So I think that would be pretty high on the list. Number 5 is close all the windows and doors and chimney flues and dampers in the house. You essentially want to close everything up as much as you possibly can, because you don't want fallout and debris and any irradiated material or whatever the case may be getting into your home. Okay, number 6. This is a little out of order here, but it's important, I think, still. If you were outside when the bomb went off before you got home, make sure that you immediately remove all your clothing. You take a shower, wash your body and your hair with hot soapy water as soon as possible when you get home. Make this quick, as you have a lot to do and not a lot of time to do it, but it's important not to leave any irradiated material on you, because it can cause burns and things like that. Okay, and you might not be able to take a regular shower. You may have to, drain the hot water tank into a 5-gallon bucket. Who knows? It might be difficult. Okay, let's see here. Number 7, take your first dose of iodine pills and other supplements that help prevent radiation absorption. I did a video on this topic that talked about a lot of the different kinds of radiation. Potassium iodine only works for a specific kind of radiation. There's other ones are for strontium, like I think it's calcium carbonate, and there's a lot of different other elements within the radiation spectrum, and they tend to gravitate towards specific types of minerals in your body. And so if you load your body up with those things, I think they're called chelating agents, if I remember correctly, and then that will help the radiation to settle in that material, and it'll pass through your body and won't stay in your system as much. So you can check that video out. I'll link that in the description below as well. Let's see here. Number 8, disconnect the main breaker from your home to the grid. This is also going to effectually turn off your air conditioning and your heater, and because you don't want air to be circulated through the home, as it increases your chances of being exposed to fallout. It's pulling outside air into the home, and you don't want to do that. Having the breaker shut off may, and I say may, also prevent a surge from a localized EMP or any surges from damage to power lines caused by the blast. So high altitude nuclear blasts will cause a electromagnetic pulse. The Compton effect kind of pushes the ions down as they move to the right. It causes the pulse, and that's what everybody's always worried about, the big EMP. Well, low altitude nuclear blasts will also cause a smaller, more localized EMP. It's not going to have the same power, it's not going to reach to the same effect and all those kinds of things, but they are still generated more in the specific area. So if you were close to the blast, you might experience some lower version of an EMP. Okay, so it's good to just shut your breaker off. Only takes about 2 seconds. Boop, just click it off, no big deal. So hopefully that would help. And then the other thing is, I briefly mentioned, there's going to be a lot of damage to the electrical infrastructure because of nuclear blasts. So it's hard to say exactly how transformers and stuff like that, because they do kind of act as capacitors. They could, put out potentially, surges and stuff like that. So that's the other reason for that. Okay, number 9 is your power outage kit. And I've done a video on power outage kit. I'm getting ready to redo it though. I want to redo mine because mine's a bit of a mess right now. Should already be pre-positioned in your clean room or in your basement, where you're going to be. You want to go ahead and break out whatever is needed to accomplish the tasks, the items on the rest of the list, because you just turned the power off in your house. So now you're going to need lights. Okay, number 10. Fill your bathtubs or water bobs with water from the tap or any other large containers you have. Go ahead and fill them up with water. You should already have your water preps in order, but having some extra on hand for sanitation will be handy. Use cold water only. Okay, you want to go ahead and leave the hot water in your hot water tank because you can use that later as well. So that's already a storage device, so usually 40 to 50 gallons, maybe 75 or 100, depending on if you've got a big house. Go ahead and leave that in the tank. Just use cold water to fill up any of those containers. Okay, let's see here. Number 11 is consolidate your survival supplies into your basement. Most likely this is probably already going to be at least partially done, but if you have some, say, in a storage building or in a barn or somewhere else or whatever, go ahead and consolidate some of that stuff in there because you're going to need to have enough to stay for a minimum of like 2 weeks. Okay, so you really need to have some stuff pre-positioned in the basement. Okay. All right. Number 12 is board up the windows to the basement, and if you have time, you can do the rest of your home, but most likely you're only going to really focus on the basement because you're trying to do this stuff as quickly as possible. Also, any exterior doors, you want to do that from the inside. That way, if the shock wave hits the glass will get embedded into the plywood or whatever, and hopefully the plywood will hold, but if it does come in, there won't be hopefully as much glass flying around and stuff. Hopefully the plywood will hold though. So it's going to protect you a little bit more. It's also going to keep out the fallout and all that jazz. You should already have the boards pre-cut and ready to go. You do also want to go ahead and take some Gorilla Tape or duct tape and tape up the seams on the doors and the windows and the HVAC vents, all that kind of stuff. You essentially want to create, like I said, a clean room with as little coming in and out of it as possible. All right. Number 13 is gather any radiological testing equipment. Again, that probably should already be like in your power outage kit or somewhere in your basement. Take some baseline readings and write down the levels. So there's a wide range of different kinds of radiation detection equipment. You've got individual dose meters, you've got Geiger counters, you've got just basic radiation meters. I'll put some links to those in the description below on Amazon. They range from anywhere from several thousand to 100-ish or maybe even less for some of the cheap ones. So you probably get what you pay for on that, but having a way to measure baseline radiation is going to be pretty important in this particular kind of scenario. Because if it's just high, and if you see your dose meter continuing to rise and rise and rise, I need to leave. I need to get out of the area because we're too close. So that's a key thing, being able to measure that radiation. Okay. Let's see. They've also got some of the stuff that I have is some of the old civil defense stuff. It does still work. You can still find some of that stuff for sale too. And I also have a meter that plugs into the phone jack on my smartphone, and then you can get on an app and look at it, and it'll read you. It'll tell you what the little deal is reading to. That seems to work. I don't know how robust it is or whatever, but I'd like to get it just an actual handheld one, but haven't gotten it yet. It's not high on my priority list. Okay, let's see. So yeah, you want to write down the levels, and if you have dose meters and all that, you want to basically record that every day and keep track of it to ensure that it's not increasing. All right, number 14 is gather your first aid supplies, especially bandages and items for treating cuts and burns. Again, probably already going to be in your house, but if not, make sure you grab it. Number 15 is, this is a kind of a lower priority, and I would only do this if you're certain that you have time to do so, or if you at least reasonably think that you've got time to do so. As we mentioned earlier, even low altitude and ground burst nukes will give off limited EMPs, so many vehicles will still run after any of these kinds of detonations. However, some might experience what they call electronics lockup if you received kind of a low or partial, sort of EMP. If you go ahead and disconnect the battery of the vehicle, then chances are that will help to prevent that electronics lockup, and you go back out, you hook your battery cables back up, and then it should be able to start. It all really depends on how intense the EMP from the device was, how far you are from ground zero. Tons and tons of variables here, so don't hold me to this, but it's something that to think about. Okay, number 16 is load your bug out bags into your vehicle in case you need to leave the area in a hurry, i.e., like you're looking at your rad meters, your that kind of thing, and your dose meter and whatnot, and you see that your levels are increasing, then you might need to leave. And so having the vehicle already ready to go is going to be helpful. Okay, number 17 is have someone monitor the news and radio messages about the locations of strikes if they're given. They may or may not be given. It's hard to say. I tend to think that they probably would be at some point, but I don't know how soon after that would be. But you can also, and the point for marking down the locations of the strikes, if you can, is so that you can determine what areas are safe to go to and like what route you need to go. You know what I mean? So if you've got like an AM radio or a shortwave radio or a NOAA radio, the NOAA weather radios, those may all have broadcasts that are going across it. You can try local FM stations and stuff, but they may or may not be working depending on where the strike was and if that infrastructure was destroyed. So that really be dependent. But the shortwave, the AM, and the NOAA radios are going to get signals from a little further away, and so they might be able to provide you something. You could also monitor your GMRS and your ham frequencies as well. GMRS there are repeater stations on GMRS that covers the vast majority of the lower 48. Same thing with ham frequencies. You might have hams who are passing along information that they hear. So those are potential places for you to gather information about where the strikes have occurred. However, I will say that between damage to the infrastructure and depending on how big the number of strikes there are and all that kind of stuff, you may also be experiencing significant electromagnetic interference in the atmosphere, and so radio coverage may be spotty at best, and it might not be as productive as we would hope. Okay, number 18 is if you are not in the path of the fallout, downwind basically, and are at a sufficient distance from ground zero, then consider just staying put inside for a minimum of 2 weeks. And you want to do this. You want to stay inside for 2 weeks. You don't want to go outside at all. You want to do everything that you can to stay in that clean room during that time. That's going to significantly reduce your chances of being exposed to fallout and other intrinsic or atmospheric radiation. If you find that you are in the fallout path or close to the strike zone, and I'm throwing out a WAG here because it all depends on the yield of the device and the detonation height, and there's tons and tons of variables. But if you're 15 to 25 miles from ground zero, depending on the yield of the device, you probably need to consider relocating to a safer area. That's just my guess. Take a look at nuclearsecrecy.com. That'll allow you to put in simulations for different kinds of nukes from different countries. It'll kind of give you an idea of how far away you need to be before you'd be safe and all that kind of stuff. All right, and again, like I said, I did that video that talked about that. You can check that out if you want. Let's see. If you had windows break from the pressure wave, then you're likely too close. So just kind of as a general rule of thumb. Avoid major freeways as they're likely going to be closed for use by the military and emergency services, the interstates, the federal interstates, and potentially other highways. But they're going to, the military is going to go in and establish a cordon around those contaminated areas fairly quickly because they don't want a lot of contaminated material coming out of the site and infecting the rest of the areas of the country, where it's not contaminated currently, because it just makes the problem worse. So they're going to probably be establishing a cordon, and they're going to be doing a lot of other things too, but that's going to be the primary one. If you are trying to flee the area, chances are that you're going to be searched, and they may take some readings on your car and your equipment and your vehicle and all that kind of stuff. And if it's too hot, you may not be allowed to leave the area with it. Now, you individually will probably be able to go through, but depending on the readings, you may or may not. Okay, so number 19. After the blast, if you have to go outside, wear personal protective equipment. Tyvek suits, radiation suits, gas masks, respirators, gloves, hoods, booties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever you have in the way of personal protective equipment. There are cheaper suits that you can do. There are more expensive suits, that even limit, gamma and alpha gamma and X-ray radiation and stuff like that. Those are usually probably out of the price range of most people. The main thing that you want to do is you want to keep the stuff from getting on you, anything that's fallen out, any dust or anything that has been irradiated or whatever. And so just a layer of like Tyvek is going to be sufficient and affordable for most people, I think. Make sure that when you do that, you tape up all your seams with duct tape. You want to limit your exposure as much as possible. When you remove the personal protective equipment, you want to do that outside your home. You want to scrub off your body with warm soapy water before entering the main living area. And you want to also try to wear a radiation dose meter and keep record of the exposure dates and durations. Okay. Number 20 is do not eat foods that were outside during the detonation. Do not drink open groundwater that was exposed during the blast. Eat and drink from your emergency supplies as long as possible. When that's gone, make every effort to drink from underground sources if possible. Now, eventually, underground sources could get contaminated, but in the short term, they're probably going to be the safest place. The information, the sources that I used for gathering this information was ready.gov, Radiopedia, and what's the other one? remm.nlm.gov, and then emergency.cdc.gov. So that's where a lot of that stuff was taken from, as well as just me throwing in common sense and prepper related items and stuff like that. Hopefully this has been helpful. Like I said, the purpose of this is to get you thinking about your area. Look around you, find, if you are close to critical targets, you probably need to be a little more on the prepared side. If you are, further away, then you probably don't have to worry about as much of this stuff as, but having a checklist that you could go through really quickly is probably a pretty smart idea, and it would be fairly easy to come up with a checklist off of the list of items I gave you here. You could just download it at realitysurvival.com. All right. As always, guys, I would love to hear your comments. What do you think about this? What would your top 10 or 20 things be for you to do? What do you think you would do in your situation? This is probably a fairly close list to what I would do for my situation, but it's hard to tell. So I would love to hear some other comments and other opinions on that as well. As always, I definitely appreciate it when you click the thumbs up button, when you share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. And don't forget to live the 6 Ps. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. Stay safe, guys.